Good afternoon. Welcome to our last Farm Viability with Fridays with Farm Viability session. I'm pleased that so many of you could join us. I'm Rob Noble, a Livingston County dairy farmer and the chair of the Farm Viability Board of Directors. The organization has a 10-person board, all active members of the agricultural community, and a network of farmer review panels. In the audience today, we have project leaders, extension educators, policymakers, farmers, and veterinarians. All of us are here to learn more about how and why change happens on farms. Before we get to that, I want to tell you a little bit about our organization. Farm Viability's mission is to create and share knowledge that improves the economic viability of New York's farmers. We run competitive grant programs that leverage the expertise of nearly 100 farmers across the state to identify the best projects for funding. To date, the organization has seen nearly 300 projects through to completion. These projects have helped farms, both big and small, across all sectors of agriculture. The projects have been run by talented researchers and educators at Cornell and Cornell Cooperative Extension, as well as researchers at other academic organizations. Sometimes the projects are led by ag service organizations such as CADE, NYFVI New York, and Grow NYC. We're also supported by the work of veterinary practices and startups such as Zymtronics. Our efforts are possible because of New York State, the governor, and the Assembly and Senate Ag Committees sharing our mission. I thank them for their long-standing support. In developing today's remarks, I look back on all the dairy and field crops work that Farm Viability has funded over the last 16 years. Our projects have touched every aspect of the dairy and field crop businesses. In the fields, where the feed is grown for the cows, farm viability projects have helped farmers learn how to fight insects using biocontrol nematodes, how to turn cover crops into winter forages, managing nitrogen use, implementing grazing plans for organic dairies, improving the safety of packing bulk silos, and have established the best number for kernel processing score, which is used in creating, corn silage. In the barn, farm viability projects have created a better understanding of the nutritional strategies to achieve a farm's goals. They've helped farms understand the value of new automated health monitoring systems, improved reproductive practices, and evaluated the use of dry manure solids as bedding. And that's a practice that we currently use on our farm. In the office, we've helped farmers to learn how to onboard new employees, to evaluate their operations, production, and financial performance using benchmarks. And in the early days of farm viability, we supported the development of business plans and business transfer plans with the work at New York Farm Net. At its core, all of these projects highlight that Farm Viability is an organization that supports the evolution of agriculture one project at a time. And that brings me back to the topic of change. Our focus on change this year seems particularly appropriate as the pandemic has highlighted the need for farms, the foundation of our food system, to be strong, flexible, and able to respond to a changing world. Planning and participating in this webinar series, combined with Senator Hinchey's listening tour, has helped the Farm Viability Board to take a step back and really think about what it is we do and how change actually occurs in agriculture. I think the webinar that highlighted Terrence Robinson's work to build the knowledge that has transformed New York's apple orchards is a clear example of how and why change can occur in agriculture. And I would like to offer that the work we are going to discuss today has the opportunity to create significant and important change in the use of antimicrobials to manage the mastitis disease. To keep this in context, let's take a look at how this practice came to be a norm. Antibiotics were introduced into animal agriculture back in the 1940s. And by the late 60s, researchers had learned that if a cow was given antibiotics during the dry-off window, when they were less likely to contract a disease, it could work as a preventative measure in treating that disease. U.S. dairy farms began to adopt a practice of blanket cow Dry Cow Therapy. That is, treating every cow when she dried off. Farmers did this because a deep understanding of mastitis and other ways to prevent it weren't yet known, and the downsides of the disease were significant. As time progressed, science has learned much more about how mastitis is spread and how to prevent it. Additionally, scientists began to understand antimicrobial resistance and the importance of reserving the use of these medicines for when they were most necessary. So in 2015, when the Farm Viability Dairy Review Panel received a proposal from Dr. Darrell Needham seeking funding to develop an analytical model that farms could use to decrease their antimicrobial use, the idea quickly rose to the top of the list. Let's hear from one of our dairy review panel members about their recollection of that conversation. Eileen, can you play the video, please?
Good morning. My name is Carrie Adams. My husband, Hal, and I operate a 200 cow dairy with 460 acres in Ontario County. I've been a member of the New York Farm Viability Institute's Dairy Committee since its inception. This committee has always been important to me because of the research that is relevant to agriculture and that is farmer driven. A prime example of the type of research that I think is important is one that we recently funded for Dr. Darrell Needham of Cornell University on Selective Dry Cow program. We used to just blanket treat all our cows at dry off time. His research, which was conducted on farms, showed that we did not need to treat all cows at dry off. He developed a program that was easy for all farmers to use to decide who to treat. This program saved us dollars in both labor and in medicine.
Okay, as a result of the review panel's input, Darrell was funded in the spring of 2016 and immediately went to work to develop a predictive model to help farms use their herd health records to identify which cows to treat and which cows they didn't have to treat. And through this work, he's been able to define criteria to identify the farms that would be most successful with this practice. For some farms, based on their herd health records and practices, this may not be a good choice, but for many others, it will help them save some money by reducing the use of the products and also be proactive in responding to consumer concerns about, blanket use of antibiotics. I'm pleased that Farm Viability was able to support veterinary practices and CADE to work directly with New York dairy farmers and to learn how to adopt this practice. Although the project completed, Darrell's commitment to ensure adoption of this practice has continued. He has worked with Valley Ag software to enable the algorithm to be downloaded and used with existing herd health software called Dairy Comp 305, which is pretty much the Microsoft of the dairy world, and it's used by most of the mid-sized and larger farms. Additionally, his team is continuing to educate veterinarians at conferences and through their continuing education programs. I'm really proud of Farm Viability's support and leadership of this work, and I'm looking forward to hearing the panel. So now I'm going to hand the screen over to the moderator for the session, Farm Viability's Executive Director, Dave Guzmeyer. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. I want to go ahead and welcome everybody again, as Rob did, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce the panel so they can get started with their presentations. So let's just go through in the order that the folks are on the screen here. We'll start with Darrell and then Phoebe and Mark. If you would like to give us an introduction for each of yourselves. So, Darrell?
Thanks, Dave. As Rob so kindly noted, I'm Daryl Neidham, and I'm a veterinarian, a dairy veterinarian and epidemiologist, and I work at Cornell University.
And
Phoebe?
I am Phoebe Schreiner. I'm the executive director with the Center for Agricultural Development and Entrepreneurship. We are keen to advance a sustainable food system. I'll stop there. Thanks. Nice to be here today.
Oh, you're muted, Mark.
Veterinarian with Dairy Health and Management Services, and very honored to be part of this program today.
So thanks. And for those of you that may be wondering, Mark is actually coming to us from Mexico right now, so his video might be a little bit slower than the rest of ours. So let's go ahead and get started. Daryl, you want to talk some about what made you get interested in the selective dry cow therapy and describe your efforts around the first project that you did in that respect?
Excellent. Thanks, Dave. Generally, as a dairy veterinarian and epidemiologist working in New York State, I'm interested in the team I work with. We're interested in helping farms be ever more efficient in all kinds of ways while providing high quality nutrients for people as well as conserving resources. And one of those resources we want to help conserve are antibiotics. And through time, you know, the dairy industry, with all kinds of help from allied service providers, udder health quality has gotten so much better. In fact, in 2021, it's never been better than it has right now in the history of the dairy industry. So through time, we've been able to change and improve and pinpoint our antimicrobial practices. Other parts of the world, we're starting to look at selective dry cow therapy, often in a top-down approach, sort of legislated. And I thought, and others, that we could get out in front of this and develop tools that the dairy industry could use to meet consumer expectations, conserve resources, among them being antibiotics. So particularly, we were out at one of our progressive dairy farms doing our dairy vet work here in Cuyahoga County, and the very wise producer said, you know what, our udder health has never been better, and we think we don't need to use as many antibiotics as we used to at the dry off period, because most of our cows now probably don't have a subclinical infection, whereas they once did. And furthermore, we've pretty much controlled contagious mastitis pathogens. So we think we can prudently use our dry cow antibiotics. And I said, you know what? We came here on the right day. Let's write a proposal to New York Farm Viability and see if we can get a real scientific trial off the ground here. So we did that. And as Rob Noble noted, we were funded by Farm Viability, and we built a model based on test day data and farm records, which we can describe in great detail or little detail as the questions go through this next hour here, to only treat those cows that are likely to benefit from antibiotics, whereas not treating those cows that won't benefit. So we did a randomized trial right here on farm in New York, and it turned out that there was in fact no difference between the low risk cows, those cows that didn't need it, and those that did. And we did that, and it turned out that it was about 64% of the cows. We've taken this idea and we've run further randomized trials based on this Farm Viability funded work across the country now, and it turns out over and over, in the right farms, the farms that have got their udder health in place, right, we can decrease antimicrobial use at dry off by 50 or 60%. So we've now implemented this on many farms.
Great, thanks, Daryl. So you mentioned that something around it's not right for every farm. And I've certainly seen that in a number of different practices and technologies over the years where farms have implemented or tried to implement certain things. And it's just been, while some farms are very successful with the practice, it's been a disaster with other farms. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the requirements in order to be successful with the technology?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, Dave. And we'll open it up with we can get the selective dry cow therapy now in general because udder health has never been better. And it's on those farms where they've got those big rocks in udder health already moved out of the way, right? So we're talking about herds that have routinely bulk tank somatic cell counts less than 250,000, ideally less than 200,000. They've got strep ag mostly eradicated from the herd, probably all the way eradicated from the herd, and Staph aureus, another contagious pathogen, very much under control, right? So it's maybe at 1 or 2% incidence. And you've got to have good records and teams to be able to implement change, right? This is all about change. And we've been really good at implementing blanket dry cow therapy, almost as good as anything that I've been involved in my career in the last 25 years, right? And now we're going to do selective dry cow therapy. So if you get those herds that are going to be successful right now, they're herds that have good udder health right now, less than 250 or 200,000 somatic cell count and contagious pathogens under control, good herd records, and teams that can implement change.
Great. So when you talk about herd records, you know, and we've talked a lot about, a number of different venues across New York agriculture, talk about data analytics and large volumes of data that farmers now have access to, and being able to actually utilize those data and make sense of it and turn data into decision-making information. So can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the dry cow, selected dry cow program?
Yeah, in its simplest form, as Rob Noble mentioned, we've put this together with our partners Valley Ag Software, so it's implemented in Dairy Count 305. In its simplest form, it's just test day data. DHIA here in the Northeast, that'd be Dairy 1. Okay, test day data, which is going to populate this algorithm, which is built right into the fabric of Dairy Count 305, and that's even enhanced a little bit if you have clinical mastitis records. So that's all you need to do this from this algorithm-based approach is DHI test day data and clinical records. I also suggest that you are monitoring your udder health through DHI data and perhaps continuing to look for those contagious pathogens through things like bulk tank culturing and perhaps even culturing and making good decisions with your clinical mastitis. But the simplest thing you need to do to implement this is just test day data and clinical records.
Great. So any other last points you'd like to make, and then we'll move on to our next panelist.
I guess the last point to make is this has been a team effort. I've been lucky enough to work with, as you can see in the slide there, some super talented graduate students who are now graduated and gone on to their PhD lives, like Amy Vasquez and Carla Fodish there. I've worked with private practitioners like Michael Capel and Mark Thomas. We've worked with other veterinarians like Paul Rapnicki and of course Valley Ag Software and our other partners within quality milk production services. So this has been a real team effort to get this rolled out across the state and across the country. So it's been a real team effort and really a pleasure to work with all these people.
So a lot of minds involved in putting all this together. That's great. So in terms of that kind of a team, and you mentioned earlier running similar trials in other parts of the United States, who have you had with those teams, and or who are your partners across the country, and how has it been rolled out in other parts of the U.S.?
Oh, that's a good question there also, Dave. Our strongest collaborators have been with the University of Minnesota, led by Sandra Godden out there. And we put together this USDA-funded grant based on a lot of the work that was first funded here in New York by Farmviability. And we ran a trial that included more herds here in New York State, herds in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and California. So Dairy Experts Group out in California, Alfonso Lago, has started to bring this out to California. And then, as you know, Valley Ag Software is a national and international company. So we've been able to roll it out with those people as well. And again, every time we bring a principal investigator on in another university, they come with talented graduate students. And a person I got to give a shout out to is a graduate student named Sam Rowe, who was really instrumental in a lot of this as well. So like you said, a lot of brains that have humbled me immensely.
Yeah. And it's great that the grad students are so involved, not only from a training perspective, but hopefully those are some of the youngest, brightest minds coming up through the industry. So it's great to have them involved in this project. So I want to shift over to Phoebe Schreiner now from CADE. And Phoebe, you know, Farmviability is really pleased to see CADE's interest in this, and like if you could talk about why you see this kind of program as being an appropriate or the right thing for CADE to be working on at this point in time.
Yeah, thank you. Well, CADE is really committed to promoting sustainable farm practices, and we actually include public health under that umbrella. You know, in terms of what's at stake here, you know, countless governments around the world and public health agencies have really acknowledged that the overuse of antibiotics are causing them to become less effective in treating infection. Right here in the US, the CDC acknowledges that 35,000 people die every year because of antibiotic-resistant infection. The UN itself is projecting a tenfold increase in the number of deaths worldwide by 2050, up to 10 million from today's 700,000. So really, this is a looming global public health crisis. In terms of livestock, and of course that's the conversation we're having today around agriculture, more than half of the total antibiotics that are used in the United States are actually used in livestock as opposed to people, and cattle represent 41% of that. So we're really talking about a lot of antibiotic use. The New York State Antimicrobial Resistance, okay, this is a mouthful, Resistance Prevention Control Task Force, which was set up by the New York State Department of Health, developed a kind of roadmap, or it's called STAR, that is supposed to be kind of a statewide guide for what New York State can do basically to address the threat of antibiotic resistance. And one of the key recommendations, of course, is that antibiotics should be reduced in the use of livestock. So from our point of view, the agricultural community actually has both the power and the responsibility to help prevent this health crisis by reducing the use. In terms of what sort of CADE is doing, we certainly joined Daryl and I think Farmviability in recognizing New York State has a major leadership role that we can play nationwide. From our own sort of organizational thinking, one of our board members, Ken Jaffe, has really been sort of pivotal in helping us envision our work in this area, because he works at that kind of intersection. He's a physician, he was a beef farmer, and deeply involved in the farm to school procurement of dairy beef in New York public schools. So he sort of brings that experience of treating resistant infection in people and then also using antibiotics in his farm practices. And essentially, under his leadership and in partnership with our colleagues, we're taking a sort of two-track approach to addressing this issue. One is to create greater market incentive for reductions in antibiotic use. So we recently piloted an initiative in the Tompkins County School District, and we're working right now with the Buffalo County school districts to basically have them procure beef from farms that are using responsible antibiotic stewardship practices. So the second sort of bucket, and that's how I'm here with all of you today, is around making selective dry cow treatment the new norm, essentially, for treating cows at dry off to prevent mastitis. In terms of our selective dry cow therapy work, we are partnering with Mike Zerkowski from the Milk Quality Production Services, QMPS, of Cornell, and Kathleen Foley from SUNY Cobleskill. And basically, we're developing a curriculum for farmers, farm workers, including Spanish-speaking farm workers, vets, extension agents, really everyone who's engaged in administering these treatments. We're piloting our initiative on 10 dairy farms in Eastern New York. We're actually working with quite a range of farms. So, from 50 cow herds up to 2,000, so that we can really gain insight into how farm size influences motivations for doing the work and what their specific implementation needs are. And another thing is one of the farms we're working with is actually on the SUNY Cobleskill campus. So we're actually already working with 100 students, all of whom intend to be herdsmen, or they're already from a family dairy farm, or plan to be a vet in the longer term in their careers. Our goal is to really take this curriculum statewide later this year and to really help scale it up, I'm sure in partnership with all the other speakers on this call today. If I could say in a nutshell, really what does impact look like for us and what we're attempting to do with our initiative, it's to really take selective dry cow therapy and normalize it as a kind of new standard. And I do hear Daryl's point around not all farms may be positioned to do this, but I have some, sort of legislative concerns around regulation that we're seeing potentially coming down the pike from different states. So anyway, I'm sure we'll have a lively conversation as this unfolds today, but that's what we're looking to achieve from ourselves. And as you can see, we're certainly ambitious.
Great, thanks, Phoebe. So I want to just during this little break in the action, remind people if you have questions as we go through, please type them into the chat box so that we can pass those on to each of the panel members. So you mentioned some, I guess, antibiotic sounded like educational information that you're developing. So if somebody was interested in working with you to pilot that or having access to it, is that a possibility, and how might they get access to it?
Sure. So developing tools in our curriculum and educational materials is of course fundamental to what we're doing. So we're not just piloting on the farms, we're piloting a kind of curriculum that will be catered to various folks who are involved in its administration. Again, the farm owners, sometimes the managers or farm workers, vets, etc. In terms of the particular materials we're developing for farmers, we really have a commitment, and this sort of speaks to the theme, right? How do we make behavior change happen? We're looking at, how do we meet people where they are? And when we look at the people who voluntarily signed up to participate in our pilot, it was actually largely younger farmers between their 20s and 40s and a little in their 50s. So it was clear sort of this younger community was really interested in making some transition and some big changes on their farms. And so in our asking them, how would you want to receive information about how to shift gears and what you need to know? The answer was interesting. It was, if I can't get it on my smartphone, I don't want it and I won't use it. It's just not going to be accessible to me. I've got mailers, sky high on my desk. I don't check my emails. Like, make it on my smartphone so I can carry it anywhere, and make sure it's accessible through social media or my Facebook, etc., so that I can just quickly tap on it, takes me straight to a website, and I can get all the information that I need. So we were really mindful of that. When it comes to some of the farm workers and managers, including Spanish speakers, what we took away from our conversations with them is the value of having kind of a big poster in the barn that has kind of some of the step-by-step guides, so that's just easily accessible and easily, within eye shot for them to do it. I think one of the last things I want to mention about sort of good practices for shifting gears is, in developing our curriculum and our tools, what we didn't want to do was to just give some technical, clinical here's the step-by-step of what you need to do, right? Of course, that's critically important, but at the same time, we wanted to understand the human aspect of doing this, because it's no small thing to make the transition from blanket to dry cow treatment. So ultimately, we really wanted to take the sort of peer-to-peer approach. We know that dairy farmers really want to listen to their peers. And so throughout all of our materials, we're including stories, basically. I'm a dairy farmer and I was nervous about doing this, but here's why I decided to take the leap when it came to administering it. Here's the key challenge I faced and how I overcame it. And at the end of the day, here's how it benefited me. So we really want to saturate our materials, not just with those step-by-step, aspects, but also understanding the humanity, of what it takes to really do the change. I do have one more thing I'd like to add about the difference between small and large farms, because we saw a really dramatic difference in terms of their motivations, their mindsets, the challenges that they faced in implementation. And that really became clear to us. The small farms, first of all, said, gee, technical materials are so often developed and catered towards big farms. Can you please prepare something for us and what our specific needs were? So that was actually, first of all, loud and clear. Secondly, the small farms were really motivated by sort of industry trends and what new consumer demand might be, so that they could get ahead of the curve on that and really sort of show, keep their place, sort of in the market context. I think also it's pretty clear that the dairy industry as a whole is really under scrutiny right now because of greenhouse gas emissions and concerns about climate change. So again, this was a way in which, from their point of view, they wanted to be ahead of the curve and show a really great face for the industry. Look how we are, implementing these sustainable practices that really mean something for people and planet. The last thing I'll say about small farms, it just takes one motivated person to oversee and administer the process, versus large farms where you're looking at thousands of cows. It's a different story. You have multiple tiers of labor and management that's required. So it definitely shows up differently in terms of the management practices and administration for them. But their rationale, unlike the small farms, is really about cost saving, right? There's just it's just a large scale of medicine that you're saving money on. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Phoebe. So I want to move now to Mark. So Mark, I understand that you've been working with Daryl for a long time, actually, in lots of different projects, but through this entire process and some early projects that Mark was involved with, and now you have a topic-specific team through Farm Viability to roll the practice out to a number of additional farms, and so. I guess can you comment a little bit, share with us what you hear from farmers and what your experience has been so far and what farmers are saying about the use of selective dry cow therapy.
Certainly, Dave, and thanks for the comments and lead into this great discussion. So, some things that are really important to our group in terms of consulting and to our clients is certainly looking for ways to optimize animal health and really maximize profitability. Obviously, the dairy industry is continued with feed prices right now, and obviously milk price concerns over many years. We're always looking for that income opportunity or savings. So how can we do that? By preventing versus treating disease, obviously, and then reducing the use of antimicrobials just fits into that. So purchasing less product. We also need to be really cognizant that as we have new data from research, that protocols change and they're dynamic. And it's really important for not only dairy producers, but veterinarians to be really open. And, in this process, the majority of herds, the majority of veterinarians and animal health staff are very open, but still got some pushback, even in some cases from a younger generation that, we've dry treated cows for the last how many years, we're going to change now. And the answer is, well, yes, we do lots of things differently today than we did years ago, especially 40 plus years ago. So, that's number one point. We have protocols that change year to year based on new data and more information. So be open to that change. And I can give lots of examples of this in my years of private practice. I remember 15 plus years ago, one of my dairy clients saying, we're going to stop dry treating, right? And about a 400 cow herd at the time. And, I jumped up and down and screamed, right? We can't do that, right? Well, they did it. And those are the things that things were fine. There were no major differences in udder health and somatic cell count and so forth. But what we did notice after about 3 years is we started to see some more subclinical infections. And that led us back to really thinking about this further and saying, okay, perhaps cold turkey, no treatment is not the case, but what can we do to, again, optimize this protocol? And that fits so well into the early trials with Amy Vasquez and Daryl, and supported by New York Farm Viability Institute, and the ability to use some of that early data to start making decisions and implementing protocols and protocol change with our clients. So being part of the Farm Viability Grant Program was really an excellent opportunity, not only within our client base, but outside of our client base to help New York farms implement this. So currently we have 17 herds, just over 12,000 cows that are enrolled in the program. And some of those herds have been on now about 15 months or so. Unfortunately, obviously, COVID put a bit of a damper on a number of months of getting out to farms. And certainly really important to visit those farms and have the face-to-face opportunity to implement. What our program has been is to, with a number of my colleagues within Dairy Health and myself, is to make farm visits, introduce farms to the concept, discuss the data, and it's really important. Success stories are really important, but the data is really, in the end, is what we need to utilize to make these decisions. It's just a reasonable approach, and as Daryl mentioned, it's not for all herds, but really for most, as we found through the implementation. We found across large herds and small herds, most herds that are left in business are progressive and needing to be so to maintain their financial viability in the marketplace. So overall, lots of interest in adopting this. And what's been important for us too for the success is working through dry cow housing facilities, close-up housing facilities. What are the facilities adequate in terms of cow comfort, hygiene, that we don't have concerns about infections during the dry period, or significant concerns. And then, as Daryl mentioned, also contagious pathogens such as Staph aureus and strep ag. The other really important aspect has been within our staff and our ability to deliver bilingual training also is actually being there on site during dry off day. And that's been twofold of benefit. One, not only for implementing this and the logistics of how do we identify which cows get treated and which don't and so forth. So not just here's a list from Dairy Comp, go do it, but actually here are the practical ways logistically that we can identify cows, help the team, and within that overall, evaluating the dry off procedure. Okay, there's lots of opportunity there in terms of hygiene and correct application of products and even storage of the products and lots of different things that the dairy producers on this call realize in terms of the do's and don'ts at dry off, right? And it's a pretty important event. We found some issues when the dry off crew changed for some reason, people that were less trained and therefore potentially less level of hygiene, we ran into some issues. And again, getting back to the data, what being critical, we had a number of examples where, a month or so into the protocols, we see, a dry cow that gets acute coliform mastitis and dies. And again, that's one cow. And, would that have happened anyway if we were still dry treating? Fortunately, again, we have clients that are clients and other adopters that are can use the data enough that they realize that, okay, that wasn't, we don't know if that was related to not dry treating. Let's stick with the program and continue through, because we're not going to stop because one cow, two cows had a bad result after we started, not directly related to selective dry cow. And fortunately, in those herds, the data is clear. We've had the opportunity to summarize that data for each farm, and the trend is, overall, the trend has actually improved udder health, reduced mastitis, as Daryl mentioned. We're not going to say that's cause and effect, but certainly the overall trend is no change to improvement in udder health. The other thing that we've done is with dairy comp records and the ability to generate some really nice reports. Those are now, thanks to Daryl, Mike Capel, Paul Rapnicki, and others with Valley Ag Software. Those are now available in dairy comp under the guide command. Is that we work with those herds through implementation and months in to track their udder health, to also give them the confidence that we're not seeing any trends in detrimental changes to mastitis cases, somatic cell count, new infections, and so forth within implementation. So we hope and believe that that really gave the confidence to these producers that this change was positive. And I think that was really important because we had some owner management buy-in and some herdsmen that didn't necessarily. They were open but super concerned and cautious. And through that process of implementation and showing the data, we've been able to really give those producers, herd managers, confidence in the program. And that's what's going to sell it, if you will, to the more farms as we get out there.
Great. So why would a farm not do it? I mean, have you approached farms and they say, just not interested?
That's a great question, Dave. There's still there are still farms that, unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, right? We all have our process of making decisions, but I guess are perhaps less confident in the data and more thinking that this perhaps can't work because of we've done this forever type approach. And again, it's just every day we need to challenge our clients, our dairy producers, those of you on the call who are from different industries and working as nutritionists, what have you. We need to just, again, challenge to think outside the box, and that with new information we can do this. As we collect this data, as we collect data in other regions, you mentioned I'm in Mexico. We're working with our client base here. We're implementing it in other regions of the world, not only the country. And as Phoebe said, hopefully just this becomes the norm, right? Instead of blanket, this just becomes the norm. Logistics shouldn't really hold back. It's on large farms and small farms, so much of protocol is driven by a list. Which cows need what vaccine, what hormone for a sync program, what cows need to be preg checked today. So really, the cows are there to dry off, if that's in the parlor or in a tie stall barn. Here's the list of cows that get antibiotic plus a teat sealant, and here are herds here are cows that only get teat sealant. We have had to deal with, one reason could be herds that aren't DHI testing for various reasons. We did see certainly with COVID, reasonably so, a number of farms that were reluctant to have technicians, outside people on the farm, especially with their milking crew. Now we don't have DHI results. But there are other options. Daryl talked about collaboration at University of Minnesota, looking at other methods, such as a culture plate that can be done on farm to identify cows. There are somatic cell counters that are available that can be done on farm, so a day or two before dry off. We don't have as much data on that, but we do have data from some farms that aren't testing or have gone to every other month testing, okay, and have successfully implemented these programs. So, outside of the discussion for today, but if you're not on DHI test, it doesn't preclude you from implementing this. We just need to work through a program, a protocol, and then again, monitor the results.
Great, thanks, Mark. And so if Kyle, if we can bring the other panelists back in for some other questions. So one of the questions that I wanted to actually pose to Phoebe, and Daryl might chime in on this as well. So if a herd doesn't have or doesn't utilize dairy comp 305, how do you get around that, and what? How much more difficult is it for a farm to implement the practice absent that technology?
With other systems, really the algorithm is fairly simple. It's cases of mastitis, so no more than one case of mastitis in that lactation, no case within the last 30 days. Okay, and then some cell count cutoff, which depending on a herd's comfort level, if you will, 200,000 cell count. So in smaller herds, again, just generating lists of cows that have had mastitis in the last 30 days and so forth, if they're not using software. Other software that we think of, AFI, Bovisync, some others, most of that data can easily be extracted or generated with a list. So it might take a little bit of work on someone's part to extract to Excel or something, but these should all be fairly simple methods, and Daryl can give some of his experience also.
Sure. Do you want me to jump in a little bit, Dave?
Yeah, if you'd like. And I also want to hear from Phoebe about if she's working with farms and what her experience has been if they're not using dairy comp or some similar software.
So outside of using DHI test day data, which for lots of reasons I think is a good way to help monitor your herd's performance, and if you don't have another proxy for that, I encourage you to do that. But the other method that's been through on-farm randomized trials, as Mark mentioned, is culturing right before dry off, and that has been proven to have the same outcomes as the algorithm-based ones, albeit that takes a little bit more time and a little bit more labor and the cost of the culture plates. But the economic analysis we've put to these, on average, right, we're upside $7 to $10 per dry off cow with the algorithm, and we're still upside $2 to $3 upside with culture-based selective dry cow therapy. So there's some other approaches in the absence of computer-generated data.
Phoebe, what's been your experience with farms that are not? Do you have farms not on 305?
Yeah, we are doing paper records and cultures, so we're not using that technology. So I don't have much to comment on that one.
Okay. We're running late, so we don't have a whole lot of time. But so I guess in rough figures, what in your experience, I guess for all three of you, what % of New York dairy farms are in a position to successfully implement dry cow therapy? What % of farms have, I guess, the mental attitude as well as the records to be able to do it?
Well, again, Dave, I think with, as Phoebe mentioned, great to hear that all of their herds enrolled are on culture. So there's various methods. So if you're not on DHI, then potential culture. Again, we're looking at some other methods of doing that with cell count. So from that standpoint, we would say close to, or really 100% of farms could. Then we get to, okay, do we have some contagious pathogens that maybe there's concerns with? I'm not sure I can give a number, and maybe Darrell has a better handle, or Phoebe, but I would say logistically, 80+% of herds can, whether they're housing facilities, hygiene, and so forth, are at this point in time something we would recommend. We might be a bit cautious there, but also, the results would say that we shouldn't see disasters. Okay, even if we have a decrease in udder health, increase in mastitis, it's not going to be a disaster. It's something that could be either discontinued, or in some cases a more conservative approach in terms of what animals will you treat and not treat. Okay, and there's other aspects to this too, that number of lactations and so forth that we don't have all the data for, but in time we'll obviously be able to collect more of that data and fine tune these.
So I just want to chime in on this. I want to slightly do a variation on the question, which is, how do we think about overcoming some of this because of what potentially is coming down the pike? I mean, I don't know if folks know right now, but the Consumer Union has been lobbying, and there is draft legislation in New York State Senate and Assembly right now around banning the use of antibiotics for prevention in livestock. So I also want to acknowledge, when we kicked off our project, we put out a nationwide press release because we felt it was really national news, and how, certainly cutting edge I know that this work is. And we were very immediately contacted by the state vet in Maryland, who actually acknowledged that their state legislature was putting forward legislation again, to regulate antibiotics use. And they reached out to us because they were like, how do we scale this up quick? We want your curriculum so that we can immediately roll it out, because now we have these regulations about to be put in place. Likewise, we were contacted by, the Northeast Animal Health conference that organizes conferences across the Northeast every year, because they wanted us to present our initiative to all the state vets from the Northeast states, exactly because there is this legislation sort of brewing. So I think that as much as not every dairy farm is positioned to do this right now, we completely understand and want to support them, but we need to also be thinking from our own side, like, what then is the solution because of what potentially has, may be coming. So I'll stop there.
Sounds like the New York State is in kind of a leadership position here nationally with respect to developing the implementation, I guess, of the technology. How can we make that happen faster? Any insights into that?
I guess I could say, Dave, that the New York Farm Viability grant program certainly is instrumental in that. If you look in a year where we had months that we couldn't travel, and there's still plenty of restrictions, to say that we have about 30 herds enrolled, beyond what likely would have occurred. I think that's a success story right there. I think also disseminating this, within the veterinary community, and then not only in New York, in other regions. So again, like Phoebe said, that this just becomes the norm. That's going to take obviously some time, but publications, conferences, so forth. We through Darrell, we're working on a white paper to present. So just more data. Again, the data is going to really give the confidence. We can talk about this, but people are going to want to see the results. And with a large group of herds, well over a year into the program, I think that's going to really speak to the implementation process.
I'll also jump in that, you know, in the 1960s, blanket treatment became the normalized standard. And I think that there's something we can learn in taking a page from their playbook in terms of how that rolled out. I would also say that, you know, again, we're taking the approach of how do we meet people where they are, recognizing the different stakeholders who are involved in administering the practice. And you know, as I said, you know, sometimes it's working within the universities, but sometimes it's social media, it's on their phones, it's stuff in the barn, it's talking to the vets. Another thing is when we think about sort of what creates that sort of cascading, you know, we get to that tipping point, it's when farmers hear things from multiple sources. So for example, if they're reading about it in the Horde's Dairyman or their kid who just graduated from SUNY Cobleskill, like, hey, I just learned about this new practice, or from their vets or from their peer farmers. So how do we create sort of a saturated environment where, again, it simply becomes the new norm? I would also say market incentive. You know, we're certainly in favor of supporting market incentive to create the change as opposed to regulation, because goodness knows farmers have so many regulations on them already. But creating some new branding certification for milk and beef where there's reduced antibiotics use that really speaks to consumers. I'll stop there.
Regarding the saturation, yeah, regarding the saturation and public awareness, you know, the leading dairy trade magazines that sit either on my desk or the back of my toilet, right? That's where you read them. In all of Progressive Dairy, Hordes, Dairy Today, and Dairy Herd Management had articles about selective dry cow therapy in the past month, right? So it is reaching critical visibility that way. And then I'll sort of segue that into, there was a couple questions in the chat here. How fast do you think this might come from the top down? I hope as an industry that we can get out in front of this and self-police this, because it's been my experience, you know, with my grandparents' dairy, my father's a dairy veterinarian, me as a dairy veterinarian, that the original stewards of resources are farmers. And I think we can do a really good job getting out in front of this, right? Phoebe did mention Maryland. That legislation has passed in Maryland. I know there's draft legislation in New York State. I hope that we can show as an industry that we are careful, responsible stewards of these resources and self-police this, whether it become through market incentives or just individual farm incentives to do the right thing.
Great, thanks, Daryl. There are a bunch of other questions in chat, and I have a bunch of questions as well. But unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time, so this concludes the fourth and final installment of the Fridays with Farm Viability, where we've been focusing on why farmers do or do not adopt new technology or practices. And all four webinars, incidentally, were recorded, and they're linked on Farm Credit East Knowledge Exchange website, as well as Farm Viability's website. I want to thank all the participants that were here to learn, who hung in with us despite webinar fatigue that everybody seems to be suffering from these days. Hopefully the researchers, educators, policymakers, and regulators were able to learn a little bit about the psychology and as Phoebe mentioned, the human aspect of why people adopt or don't adopt technologies, and that knowledge will help to guide their efforts in the future. I want to thank Farm Credit East for helping to sponsor this webinar series. They've been great partners, and especially Kyle Bell, Farm Credit's a tech guru who's been doing a lot behind the scenes to make things run as smoothly as possible. And thank you for the time of the panel, for Mark, Phoebe, and Daryl, for your insights and experience with the antibiotic selective dry cow therapy project that's been the focus of today's presentation. And also special thanks to Eileen Randolph. She's on Farm Viability staff, and she's the one that did a terrific job organizing and delivering all four of these sessions. So thanks to everyone for all your help and support, and wish you all the best in implementing practices on farms. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Thanks everybody who listens.
Bye.